Welcome everybody back to another episode of How to Get Away with Staffing. I've got an amazing guest today, Karen Gonzalez from Live Hire here, and we're super excited to talk to you guys about all things staffing, contingent workforce, direct sourcing, maybe some AI, and we're hopeful for a good conversation today. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited to talk to you. You've got a lot of experience, a lot of great things I'm sure you guys are doing. And so, I think what would be really cool is just to hear, how did you get into staffing?
So I have a story, probably like a lot of people. It was completely by accident. I'm hoping that actually more people will get into staffing more as a choice versus kind of stumbling into it. I was hired to work in an HR department of a large automotive company. And they said, have you ever thought about recruiting? And I didn't really even know exactly what that would entail. But I'm like, sure, I need a job. Like, what do I need to do? And they hired me and I've never left. So I went from recruiting to other roles within staffing and then kind of went to the MSP side of the business and now on the technology side.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely true. There's a lot of like accidental staffing professionals that come into the market. Awesome. So I guess in the last maybe like, what do you think, 3 to 5 years, you've been more on the direct sourcing side?
Yeah, I started with Live Hire in January of 2020. So it's been a little over 4 years. Direct sourcing was still fairly new at that point. I guess depending on, Dustin and I were actually going back and forth about this. I think depending on how you define direct sourcing, I think what we think of direct sourcing today, we were still fairly new 4 years ago. And prior to that, I was on the MSP side of the business. So
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, direct sourcing, the term, it's interesting. There's been a lot of conversations about it for a while, right? And I think we're really seeing it come to fruition now. If you had to explain it to somebody that was new to the staffing industry, which I was, 5 years ago, I was new to the staffing industry and I didn't know what direct sourcing was. So if you had to explain it to somebody for the first time, how would you describe it?
yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I think if you still ask people, 10 people that question, you'd probably get 10 different answers. The way that we define it is really utilizing a client's brand to source and engage talent through private talent pools. Now, there could be a public talent pool involved as well, but that's really what it boils down to. So I think if you think about 4 years ago, there was a lot of trial and error happening. So everybody was trying to kind of get into direct sourcing, do direct sourcing. There weren't a lot of best practices around direct sourcing. And so I think there was a lot of hit and miss. And there were probably a lot of programs that weren't very successful because we just were learning. We were still learning at that point what a successful program would look like and what it actually entails.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. It's sort of like, we work a lot with staffing recruiting agencies, and the value of a staffing recruiting agency back in maybe 90s and early 2000s was their database, their private talent pool. And you're just applying sort of that same idea to an internal HR department, it sounds like. Would that be like a correct?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So when I think back to my early staffing days, even like, we had our spreadsheets of like the people that we would call that were for third shift or that, our special people for a certain role. And we were working off spreadsheets. Those were essentially a talent pool on a spreadsheet, right? And so when you think of large databases, it's kind of the difference between what we do as in forming these private talent pools versus a large database. So somebody could say we have a public talent pool. That's really a large database full of a lot of different people with a lot of skills. We take that and they say, okay, we want specific pools and we're going to build those pools from this giant database, right? And so we're then trying to segment them in either by role, by geography. Most of the time it's by role, but we can segment that talent in a lot of ways so that it's easier to find that talent versus having, 100,000 people in your database and you're looking for a needle in a haystack and trying to figure out like, where do I start to find this customer service person or this Java developer or what have you. And when a database gets so large, it's very hard to nurture those candidates and keep them engaged. It just becomes too big. So talent pooling really provides, I think, the answer to that, and just being able to be more specific and then be able to nurture that talent along the way.
Yeah, like honing in on who you already have available to you in your database. You know, I was at HR West. I don't know if you're familiar with HR.com's in Oakland. I just got back yesterday. And one of the things that one of the presenters was talking about was the fact that like something like 80-90% of your hires are people that are already in your database. And so like people spend all this time spending money on external recruitment and Boolean string searches and all these crazy things. And really like you guys and other direct sourcing platforms, you know, or just the idea of, you know, those databases that holds the key to like the majority of hiring problems, you know, and like just finding the right people, which is really,
you're absolutely right.
it's like the opposite.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that we've talked to clients about is they have these large databases already for people that have applied for full-time roles. We can actually do an export of data. It's not an integration, but literally export of data. Ask everybody in their database whether they want to join the talent community for that company, and then start to segment all of those people into talent pools and really figure out like who's still available, because they've already made an investment in trying to find talent. And a lot of those people are just sitting there waiting for a response, but because their database is so large, they're not getting a response because that talent team cannot possibly contact everybody that has applied for a role. And so we then utilize that talent. And a lot of times that talent, even though they've applied for a full-time role, we know about 40% of talent that applies for a full-time role would also consider contingent roles. So to your point, they've already got a lot of people in their database. How do they then leverage the investment they've already made, and then continue to build on that?
Yeah, just operationalizing something they already have, right? Versus looking externally to solve those problems. So
absolutely.
With the rise in the idea and the concepts, you know, you're hearing direct sourcing at all these different conferences and, you know, white papers and all that type of stuff. Are you seeing a growth in the adoption of it? Like, or is it still people are hesitant? Like where are we at on that spectrum?
I think it's a little all over the place, which isn't a great answer, but I think you know, when I think back to even 2 years ago, we did a lot of research and we really thought we were going to see high adoption by now. Like probably 60% of enterprise clients we thought at this point would have adopted direct sourcing. That hasn't happened. I do think last year was a tough year for the market. So I just think there was a lot of movement. There were people moving around, you know, in and out of executive roles. And so a lot of things got put on hold. And we are now, certainly in this first quarter, seeing more movement and more execution from clients that have been thinking about direct sourcing and they were kicking the tires. Now they're finally starting to put a plan in place. So that's been really great to see. I do think we're still very early on the adoption curve. I think that as we, you know, as this year progresses, we'll certainly see more adoption, but I think, you know, we're kind of towards the top, but we still haven't crested at the top. So yeah, that's kind of where we see adoption at this point.
Yeah, you're reminding me of my Gartner days because the hype cycle, you know, the hype cycle, we're at like that mid-tier, but yeah, how long is it going to take to get over that hill? It will be interesting. But I mean, on our side of the house, our EOR business, you know, we've seen a lot of maybe not things defined specifically as direct sourcing, but a lot more client organizations coming to us directly versus via a staffing and recruiting agency. So I think we're definitely seeing a rise in self-sourcing your talent, whether that be through, you know, a direct sourcing model or otherwise. So, you know, I think, I also think that AI is going to be playing a role in that. I think there's some strong use cases for that, like curation of talent in a large data set that perhaps AI could solve for. Have you seen any of that in the market at all?
Yeah, I mean, we utilize AI within our technology. And so when you think about the technology, it's really what is enabling that curation partner or that curation team to be more efficient, right? So that is the machine learning, that is natural language processing. All of those things are playing a role, whether it be parsing resumes, whether it's matching of candidates. One of the things that we talk about a lot is how fast we can get candidates to respond. In some of our programs, it's less than 10 minutes. And that kind of jumpstarts how quickly you can, you know, submit a shortlist and then your time to fill. And so the AI and the machine learning is what's happening in the background to enable that team to be more efficient, to find those candidates more quickly, and ultimately to get people placed more quickly. So we're definitely seeing more use cases for AI, whether it be, I mean, we recently implemented ChatGPT within our platform to enhance job descriptions. So that's just one example, but we'll continue to see innovation in that area when it comes to the technologies and how we're using that in the recruiting process and to help automate some of that some of those tasks that recruiters have been responsible for in the past that will ultimately make them more efficient. So the big question is, is AI going to replace recruiters? There's a big debate on that. I don't think anytime soon, because I think you still need that human element when it comes to recruiting. There are going to be people that are on the tech side that would totally disagree with that. That's just my opinion of being on both sides of the fence. So we'll see. But I do think for now, it will make their lives easier, is the way that I see it.
Yeah, no, I mean, didn't they say the same thing about like Indeed and Monster.com? Like, and then those are like their biggest customers are recruiting agencies, right? Like,
Yeah,
so yeah, I don't think
absolutely.
AI is gonna replace anybody's role. I mean, I think people that do a lot of writing, it could be, like blog post writing or like that type of stuff. Just content creation, I think is gonna be tough, but for recruiting agencies, I mean, I think it's just gonna help you become more efficient because the tools are there to help you deliver a better performance. And I think AI is just one of those tools. And as the data sets get bigger and bigger and bigger, you need it, or else you can't compete because you are spending the majority of your time sifting through stuff, that's not relevant.
Right.
So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to be a big asset to recruiting and staffing partners,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
think so too. We'll see how this goes. I mean, technology is moving so quickly that it's always fascinating to look back a year and realize like even what we didn't have a year ago or 2 years ago. And I've been in staffing forever. So the changes that I've seen over the last 5 years um, has just really, it just is exponential compared to the changes that were happening 15 years ago. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about how the whole gig economy has really driven the adoption of leveraging more contract talent? Because I feel like in the past, and I know like the culture within our company when I joined was a lot of people in our industry viewed contract work as like a second-rate type of opportunity. And now it's almost
Yeah.
like the preferred method of work. So I don't know if you feel the same way or you see those same things happening, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's happening. And I think certainly when you look at some of the large tech organizations, even, I mean, the percentage of contractors at those companies has risen greatly. Sometimes, I mean, we're seeing in some companies upwards of 40%. In some cases, 50% of the workforce is actually contractors versus full-time hires. And that I think is a result of a few things. One, companies need to be agile, so they need the flexibility in some cases to flex up and down. But two, it is a change in the way people want to work, right? I know a lot of people that want that flexibility. They don't necessarily want to be at one company. They want to be able to flex up and down when according to their lifestyle. So I think it's just a change in how people want to work, but then also, again, the agility that creates for companies and organizations.
Yeah, I want to say even I think this article came out a few years ago, but like Google as an example, I think they had something like 200 plus thousand contractors.
Yeah.
I think they may have got their hand slapped there a little bit. But still though, I mean, if Google's doing those types of things, right, like other people are going to adopt that. And I think there are industries specifically that are maybe more um, gig economy forward. So do you see any of that specifically in your space, like any specific industries that really are forward thinking in this area?
I mean, I think historically, definitely the tech space. I think I've seen an uptick in pharma and automotive as well, using more contractors. Um, but it's a little hit or miss. I don't know if it's industry specific or just, kind of the direction that a specific company is going, but those are probably three areas where I've really seen kind of that uptick in contractors. And I think about all the recent layoffs, right? And so if you have a high percentage of contractors, it allows you to kind of keep a core group of full-time workers and then flex with your contractors. And so many people were impacted by those layoffs. I just wonder, had the percentage been higher and they had that ability to flex a little bit more, if there would be as many full-time workers that would have been laid off. And so, and I think that creates PR issues for them as well. So
Yeah.
again, I don't think it's industry specific, but I definitely think that those are three kind of verticals that I see a lot of usage.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be one of those companies being highlighted on those like layoff TikTok videos. That's been pretty rough for I think a lot of players. So yeah,
Definitely.
I think the tech industry obviously has always been a big user of contract talent, and we've definitely seen pharma is one for sure. Definitely healthcare is obviously still a big one. It's a little bit different than
Yeah.
you'd expect, but I've actually seen a little bit more like direct sourcing ideas being adopted in the healthcare market more recently, which it's a little bit more difficult, but yeah, in general, like the whole flex up, flex down. And also like if you do need to hire full-time, you can source from that group of contractors you already have who already know your systems, already know the business, already have relationships. So yeah, I think contract work is going to be a lot more common, you know, as we continue to grow, and the gig apps and all that type of stuff just really help perpetuate that. So
Yeah, and I would agree with healthcare. I mean, that's definitely an area where there's been a huge uptick. So I would agree with that as well.
yeah. Yeah, I think you know, one of the reasons people may not adopt it is perhaps the you know, the front end is very much so prioritized for a lot of players. But a lot of the companies that I speak to are concerned about the employee experience of that, right? The employee experience of
Yeah.
either being sourced or being hired through some type of contract work, whether it's a platform or an EOR or whatever. So I guess, do you have any, I guess, insights or best practices about like how you marry the front end technology, AI, direct sourcing technology with maybe the back end of like onboarding and bringing those people into your organization successfully?
So our specific technology, when you think about direct source, really from sourcing up through offer. And
Yeah.
so, and we're a very talent centric platform. So that candidate experience that you were referring to, it really starts with the sourcing, right? And how do people feel when they're in the platform? And we did a lot of day in the life studies around, where do candidates fall off in the process? What's important to them? What's important to recruiters? How can we make their jobs easier? And we really built the technology around those experiences. And so, our focus is really starting with a great candidate experience. They have one of the highest NPS scores of, I think, anybody in our space. And we're hyper focused on that because there's a direct link between their experience and the brand, right? So if companies are trusting us with their brand, then that candidate better have a great experience. So I can't speak to as much from an onboarding perspective, although we integrate with, other like third parties that are responsible for onboarding and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I know. I think your point is strong though, right? Like the candidate experience is all encompassing, you know, that interview process or that sourcing process. So, you know, one of the things that I think is central to that is like communication. So is there any like types of communication or like methods of communication you really try to prioritize to make sure your NPS score is super high and that everybody has good experience?
Yeah, we did some research around this too. And what we were told through our research is that texting is the preferred method for most people because most people will have their phone. But if you think of like a warehouse worker, they're not in front of a computer. So, but most people will have their phone.
Yeah.
So for us, that's the primary way that we choose to communicate with our candidates. And so there's a lot of things within the platform that allow us to communicate efficiently and effectively. So one example is all of the communication, whether it's email, text, whatever it may be, is housed within the platform. So any recruiter coming and going can see that history. And that candidate is not starting over explaining what they want, where they are in this process. So that kind of goes back to candidate experience. And I think our ability to kind of do some bulk engagement as well. So if we need a lot of people for like some volume roles, the ability to communicate to a large group of people quickly and get a response. Or you think about during COVID, right? And we're companies that had to communicate really quickly, like we're shutting down our building, like, you can't come into the office. There historically hasn't been a great way to communicate with a large group of people quickly so that you don't have people show up. And our platform allows us to do that. So
Interesting. Yeah, those have been the only groups of I guess vendors that have really even delved into that space were like point solutions. So to have it already connected to your talent, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. Say that it was called like emergency notification response tool, something like that. I think
Yeah.
I'm recalling from my Gartner days because I had to know all the different technology spaces and like who played there. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. That type of communication is an interesting use case as well. Well, I
Yeah. And
guess
when I think about, oh, go ahead.
no, you're good. You're good. Keep going.
No, I was going to say, when I think about candidate engagement, another kind of use case for our technology or for direct sourcing technology is when you think about some of the layoffs that are happening, how can we capture those people in a talent pool? Because when that company is ready to hire again, how much better would it be that they reach out to people that were laid off not because of performance? They reach out to those people first rather than using job boards or whatever else, and rehire some of those people versus having to start from ground zero. So at least you've captured those people, you're engaging with them, and it's just a better experience for the candidate, but it's also a better experience for the customer. So I think that's another way that we've seen companies use the technology.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that would be the right thing to do, right? Like start with the people you just laid off before you hire new people, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it's sort of similar to what we see a lot in our space is like retiree rehires as contractors.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the EORs play in that market, but you know, companies that want to, hey, this person's going to retire, but we want to maybe have them like consult for us for a little bit, you know, a year or 2 years or whatever. They'll do the same thing. So communication around that is though a little clunky sometimes. So to have some support in that regard is definitely important. What do you think?
Yeah. I think
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you the question. So
yeah, sorry, I think there's a slight delay.
yeah,
So
a little bit. That's okay.
apologies.
No, you're good. What do you think maybe the next like 5 years looks like in this direct sourcing market?
So I think, I mean, obviously we're going to continue to see this kind of digital transformation. I think you'll see more use cases for the technology, and all the technologies will be doing development. So they're, you know, one platform to cover many things, including direct sourcing. And I think it'll be interesting to continue to see how the VMSs and the direct sourcing platforms and all the other technology kind of play together, and where they're going to come together, right? Because right now, you know, a client could have a very complex tech stack when you start thinking about, you know, VMS and EOR and direct sourcing and all these different, you know, vetting technologies and assessments and all of those things. So how is that going to start coming together within the platforms? I think, you know, it's moving from more of a people shortage to a skill shortage. So how are we going to address that gap? And you think about internal mobility and, you know, how does direct sourcing play a role in filling that gap? So I think we'll continue to see that just because technology is evolving so quickly. You know, there's roles that are being created that nobody's really ever done before, or there's not a huge population of people that actually do it. And then I think finally, you know, this idea of total talent, feel like we've been talking about it for a
Yes.
decade or more. But I do see a little bit more traction now on the total talent front. So I do think there's going to be more movement. Because when you think about it, I mean, talent's talent. So we want to be utilizing that talent wherever we need them, whether it's contingent or whether it's a full-time role. I think the biggest challenge here in North America is, you know, we've got these silos between procurement and HR, and how do we bring that together and focus on a total talent strategy? And so I do think there will be more movement there. So those are kind of the things that are kind of top of mind for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just going back to your first point about the different softwares and solutions that people are using, like the marrying of these MSP, VMS, you know, freelance management or gig platforms that people are using to the direct, like there's a lot of disconnected systems that exist. And navigating that as just an HR person, right? Like I think that's why a lot's like, oh man, I got to use this thing, but then I got to go over here and do this other thing. Like there's some
Right.
burgeoning thoughts of how do we like marry this stuff? Because if we can't marry it, then it's going to be difficult to keep things, you know, moving in a positive direction. It just becomes red tape at some point.
Yeah, and I think there's a misconception. I mean, most of the time, unless a client's doing their own curation, they're not actually touching the direct sourcing technology. So I think, in some ways it's been overcomplicated because people just don't understand exactly where the technology sits and who's using what. And am I going to have to learn a whole new technology? And do I have to, go through this huge integration with all of my systems? That actually doesn't happen. And so but I do think at the end of the day, clients are like, why can't I find one platform that does all of it, that does my sourcing, that is VMS, that is onboarding, that does all these things without having to do a bunch of integration. So I think we'll just see more transformation when it comes to that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think that transformation might come in the form of integrations or new features or consolidation, right? Like it's very similar to like the CRM market maybe 10 years ago. I mean, Mark Benioff, Salesforce guy, he was like, at some point, clients just got to pick a horse to ride. The horses are all going to be 70, 80% of the way there, but eventually they'll get close and they'll have all the features, And so I think a
Yeah,
similar thing's going to happen in our space as well.
I agree. And I'm kind of excited to see where this all goes. It's an exciting time to be in this space, and it's a fun time to be in this space if you're comfortable with change. If you're not comfortable with change, then it makes it a little bit more difficult. But if you are and you're excited about the things that are kind of coming down the pike, then it's a fun place to be.
For sure. That's what we tell all of our new hires. Hey, listen, like, it's going to change all the time. Change is the only constant is going to be the change that we're making. So if you're okay with that, then you'll be a good fit, right? If not, maybe not. So no, I think so too. And I think the changes are exciting. I think, when I joined our organization, I did not know that this space was going to take off as quickly as it did. So sometimes you find yourself at the right place at the right time, and it's been a really cool experience. So I appreciate you giving us some more insights in the space. Thank you so much. You've got a wealth of knowledge, and I'm excited to see what happens with direct sourcing. I really do hope that organizations adopt it more and prioritize it because I think it's a great opportunity for them. And we'll see what happens. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
No problem. No, really appreciate it. So, we hope that you guys enjoyed the podcast, and if you have any questions, reach out to us. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.